What's up, guys? Happy Tuesday. Welcome back to another episode of Eat, Train, Prosper. Today, Bryan and myself are conducting our, I don't want to call it semi-monthly, but I also can't say monthly, our more often than not monthly, but not quite fully monthly Instagram Q&A episode where we put up some story boxes on our Instagram stories, and then followers will submit some pretty good questions, and we always try and tailor them towards things that we can actually provide context and nuance on that is so popular on Eat, Train, Prosper. That is today's episode, but we have some really cool updates from Bryan that I'm excited to hear about because these are all news for me as well. And then I honestly don't have the greatest updates this week, but I will provide them once we get to it. Bryan, kick us off, please.
Yeah, for sure. We got great questions today. So one of our questions was actually super specific to my training and some of the lengthened work that I've been doing. So I'm actually going to save my full training update and include it in the answer to the first question. I think that'll probably be the most time efficient way to do this. So then I'll jump into my next update, which is something I alluded to on my story the other day, or yesterday rather, I guess. I put up my sleep and then my HRV reading underneath, and my HRV was 245. And I got a ton of comments from people, like at least 10 or 15 comments, people being like, wow, that's like the highest HRV reading I've ever seen. Like, that's insane. What's going on? And I kind of hinted at there's something different in my life that I'm doing different, and how much this is contributing to these ridiculously high HRV readings, I don't really know. I'll also say as a caveat that the HRV readings are not like drastically higher than they were. I mean, they're always high for me in the morning, and that's where I'm getting these high HRV readings from. So what I do is I wake up in the morning and I close my eyes and I focus on my breathing, and I do this 1 minute breathe thing that's part of the Apple Watch. So accuracy again is definitely in question, but it's my N of 1. I'm consistent. I breathe the same way each time, et cetera, et cetera. So in the past, the last year, it's been pretty consistently between 180 and 220 in the mornings. So looking at this 245 number, it doesn't feel like as much of an outlier as it would be if my morning readings were 80 or 100 or something like that. But the main thing I'm doing, so for those that don't know, I turned 40 last week. And another thing I've been doing over the last year that you guys following the podcast are aware of is I've been focusing on nasal breathing activities. I've been talking about initially, like last year, I talked about how I started doing walks where I was just focusing on breathing through my nose when I was walking. I didn't realize that I was constantly huffing and puffing through my mouth pretty much all the time. And so I started doing that a number of months ago, which has been great. And it got easier. Adaptations happened really quickly. When I turned 40, I actually had listened to a podcast with the guy, James Nestor, I believe his name is, who wrote the book Breathe. And he threw out some stats that I actually haven't even looked up because I kind of don't really care. Like, they were profound enough when I heard them from him that I was like, what is the downside of actually trying to implement some of these things that he's discussing? So some of the things he said was that 60% of people, predominantly I would assume males, breathe through their mouth at night while they sleep and don't realize it. And I can't believe how high that number is. I mean, 60% seems like an absurdly high number. But then I kind of talked to my friends within my friend group here in Colorado and texted a few others. And it seemed around 60% of them, as far as they knew, huffed and puffed through their mouth when they breathed at night. Their significant other would confirm it. Some didn't realize they were doing it. Then they asked their significant other. So it seemed to align up with what he was saying. And then he stated some stats that mouth breathing, specifically at night, he was way more concerned with it at night than during the day because of the way that it can impact your ability to get into deep sleep. And he said some stats that mouth breathing at night was linked to both mental disorders later in life as well as cardiovascular disorders. So it seems like it would be affecting you psychologically and physiologically over the course of time. And all related to kind of this inability to get into a deep sleep. And then you guys have heard me on the podcast talk a lot in the past about how I wake up 2 to 3 times a night every night. I always go pee, all these things. And he was like, in the podcast, he said one of the main signs of somebody that is breathing through their mouth while they sleep is that they tend to wake up 2 to 3 times a night and think they need to go pee. Which of course, spoke very, very deeply to me. So the solution, according to Mr. James Nestor, was to begin mouth taping at night. And I, of course, had heard of this and had an inkling that I was, like I said, breathing through my mouth at night, but never really thought much about it. So on my 40th birthday, happy birthday to me, I decided to start mouth taping. And the first couple nights were challenging. I woke up more often than I did prior to mouth taping. And it was a little frustrating. Like I had some poor sleep, but somehow, despite waking up multiple times throughout the night, I was waking up actually feeling more rejuvenated because I wasn't breathing through my mouth, I assume. And then about day 3 or 4 after instituting this mouth taping, that's when my HRV readings really started skyrocketing. And it wasn't just my AM reading. I started noticing my readings while I was sleeping also increasing drastically. So while my readings while I was sleeping would be between 50 and 110 in the past, now I was seeing readings between 100 and 200 while I was sleeping, just unconscious readings, as I'm sleeping. So far, it seems like this is an extremely positive thing for me. And I've also instituted, on top of my nasal walks, which I've been doing, my nasal breathing walks, I've been doing every second or third bike ride that I do is a nasal breathing only bike ride. And one thing about that I was really impressed with is that I was actually able to sustain the high 130s, low 140s heart rate while breathing through my nose. And I really didn't think that was possible because my walks that I do, my heart rate is between like 90 and 110. So when I was able to get on my bike, and at first it was like, teens and then 120s. And I was like, wow, I'm still like doing okay. I can handle this. And I pushed it and I hit a few minutes in the low 140s where I was still breathing clearly through my nose. So as far as personal development goes, I kind of like these little physical challenge based goals. And so for me, this fits in a perfect alignment with that, and is something that I'm really enjoying kind of working towards as I enter my 40s.
Question for you.
Yeah.
Have you, and I don't have an Apple Watch, so I don't know how much data and metrics are available to you. Have you noticed anything in the distribution of deep sleep, light sleep, REM sleep, etc., since the mouth taping over like the last 5 or 6 days or so?
Yeah, so the Apple Watch doesn't go that deep. I think that if I wanted that information, I would need to get like an Oura Ring or something like that. So all I'm getting from the Apple Watch is how much actual sleep I'm getting compared to how much time I'm getting in bed. So you get that ratio of bedtime to sleep time. And then I also get a reading, kind of a graph of when I wake up in the night. So each time I wake up, there's like a little line that kind of separates my sleep pattern. And if I actually am awake for more than, I don't know how long it is, but then that line becomes like a gap. And you really, really don't want the gaps, because every time I would, be up for 20 minutes tossing and turning because I'm hot in the past, that would be a gap. And I haven't really had too many of those gaps, which is good. I'm still waking up. I'm now only 10 days or 11 days into this thing. So I don't have a ton of data yet, but it does seem to be trending in the right direction.
Very cool. I may try that tonight. My sleep has been quite poor the past 2 weeks or so. However, I do think a large part of that is caffeine mediated. And then I've caught myself in a bit of a vicious cycle, like poor nights of sleep. We've had some late podcasts, and then I have early mentor call on Wednesday sort of thing. So a little bit of circumstance, but to the point now where last night was probably the culmination. Last night was by far the worst night of sleep I've had in recent memory. So bad that I woke up and I was up, and I'm like, you know what? It's probably 4:30, 5 in the morning. It's still dark out. I'm just going to get up and start my day. but it was like 2:15 a.m.
Oh no.
And one of my rules is like, I never look at my watch, or the clock if I'm like up in the middle of the night, because I don't want to know. But that's why I was like, I'm up. I'm like, I've been trying to sleep. It's not working. I'm just going to get up and start my day. And it was like 2:15. And I was like, well, fuck.
No, dude, that's the worst. That is the absolute worst. I've totally been there. Well, if you decide to mouth tape, it's a micropore tape, because you want it to be breathable. You don't want it to be like a duct tape type thing where it's literally like closing off your entire mouth. The general rule of thumb is that by going like with your mouth, you should be able to kind of break the tape off if you need to. So that's, for me, that was one of the main reasons I delayed starting it. And at 40th birthday worked so fortuitously, because I ordered this, like a week prior, 4 days prior, or whatever, and then Amazon got it to me. So I don't know, you can get it at like a CVS or a Walgreens, or I don't know what they have in Bali, but you probably don't want to go with like a duct tape or some sort of like hostage situation tape,
Yeah, it might be one of those things I start when we return to the States in a couple weeks.
Yeah. Cool. And then I have one more. Actually, I have a few updates, but another just quick one is I did my RMR reading, which you and I kind of discussed offline a little bit, or online, I guess. But my RMR is resting metabolic rate, which I always thought was a synonym for BMR, basal metabolic rate, but I'm potentially thinking it's not at this point. So BMR would be like if you're basically just in your bed sleeping for 24 hours, and RMR would be if you're resting but not active for 24 hours. So you the fact that you're sitting is more calorically expensive than if you're lying type thing. So I believe what I did was a RMR test, because I'm sitting there, I'm awake, I was 4 hours into my day. They did cue us to, no stress leading up to it, no activity for 24 hours prior, things like that. But I was still, despite all of that, quite surprised that my RMR number came back at 2434. But then kind of working backwards on the calculations, it didn't really surprise me, because based on my projected NEAT and daily activity, I think that my maintenance is in the low 3000s. And so that would kind of calculate correctly with that. But that was fun. That was cool and a unique experience, I guess. I'd be curious to see how far it drops when I'm dieting, because this was in a fed state. Like I walked in there, my body weight's in the low 190s. I've been out of my deficit for 2 months now. But I'm sure, like, one of the points I made on my story was that's crazy. My RMR is 2,400, because when I'm dieting, there are periods of time where I'm eating 2,400 calories or less on top of 15,000 steps and 5 days a week of weightlifting, and I'm still not losing weight. So that is wild to me, how much that must drop when you're in a caloric deficit.
I wouldn't put too much true weight into an RMR reading. I think the margin of error is quite large there, potentially. So I would say if it's, what I would kind of use it as is like, are you above or at what would be expected of you? Great. If you're considerably under, have you been facilitating an environment that would be conducive to that? Have you been underfeeding yourself for a long period of time? Those sorts of things. But yeah, I wouldn't put too much weight into those sorts of things for the listeners out there.
Yep. Cool. And then my last update real quick is just that, actually, man, I can't even talk about one thing, because this episode is going to come out on the 6th, right?
Let's check.
Yeah, it's going to come out on the 6th. So there's actually one thing I can't talk about yet. But the other thing I can talk about is that Paragon's going to be starting 18 weeks of specialization on 9/12. So that's going to consist of, for our physique programs, that's going to consist of 6 weeks with a focus on glutes and back, 6 weeks where the focus is on quads and shoulders, and then 6 weeks where the focus is on hamstrings and arms. And so we decided to run these cycles like this, because over the course of 18 weeks, you're going to get a period of time where you're specializing on each muscle group. We know maintenance volume is extremely low. So once you've spent 6 weeks building and focusing, prioritizing one area, you can then drop that area back down in volume, prioritize a different area, and continue working forward from there. It's definitely possible. And the feedback I've gotten from some people that I've talked to this about is, how are you going to build anything in 6 weeks? Like most specialization cycles are kind of long-term focuses where you're spending 9 months working on a muscle group, kind of like I did for my hamstrings. But at the end of the day, this is there's an enjoyment-driven factor of training too. And the fact that over the course of 18 weeks, each muscle group is going to get a priority period. It really is just a different way of training 18 weeks of straight hypertrophy where everything might be equal. You're just kind of going to skew some of that volume and intensity in one direction for 6 weeks before it switches back to another 6 weeks. And I think this is going to be a super fun way to train, and the first time we've really done anything like this.
Yeah, it's very, very cool. I think one thing that you brought up what's really good is like the enjoyment factor, specifically within like how Paragon as a business is structured in the kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Subscription model is basically what I'm looking at. Like you have to give people training that they enjoy and look forward to and sort of thing, instead of being like, hey, everyone, guess what? 9 months hamstrings or everything else on maintenance volume, right? Like if you did something like that, I would imagine there would be a considerable drop off in subscriptions. So there is a part of like, you have to understand your customer base and keep them engaged and stuff as well. And I think you guys definitely do a very good job of
Thanks, bud.
that.
Yeah, we're just trying to walk that line between optimality and enjoyment. So
Exactly.
very cool. Yeah. What is going on in the world of Aaron?
So, I mean, the thing that we realized today, there's 3 weeks left in Bali.
Wow.
I have here in my notes, parentheses, fake tier, because we're only going to be back in the United States for about 2 months before coming right back. So at that point, it's kind of fun because there's like a list of things we need to do when we're back in the States. A little bit of travel. I'll get to see my family. I haven't seen my family in a couple of years. So that'll be fun. So trying to cram some things in at the end. Always things, time comes up, moves really quickly, but things will be very fun and hectic there, I'm sure.
Yep.
And then we just wrapped up a couple days on a nearby island where I just decided I'm not tracking any of my food, right? I kind of have known this from enough times doing this. I'm going to come up short on food. It is what it is. When we were with other people eating a traditional breakfast, lunch, dinner structure. The day that I did work out, I had like a quick kind of post-workout thing, but I came back 2.5 pounds down, which I expected. And I really it's always a fun and a highlight to the power of periodization and that the habits of tracking your food provides. And like when you know what you're looking for, when you have like a basic meal composition structure, a feeding framework, gone are the days of like going on vacation, being like, I'm back, I come back up 12 pounds. Like what happened? You know what happened when those things sort of happen. So it's always just fun to see those things kind of work out. Granted, it's not what I was really looking for, because when I came back, I was in the 180s and I was like, I just do not like seeing that. But I just ticked up calories this week anyway, now that I'm back. And dropping my volume of training, moving into training to 2 working sets for most of my lifts, and really going at beating the logbook and really, really pushing those 2 sets. I started that last week with I was kind of like a little bit of a in-between stage, testing some things. And this week is like the first week I'm really committing to it. And I buried myself on my first lower body session. I was so nauseous. And like I got, after my last set of the hack squat, I've had full blown Fran lung. Like,
oh man,
when that feeling comes back and I'm like, why? It's not even like, it's not cold out whatsoever. And I was like in a world of just feeling sick, literally feeling nauseous and stuff. I'm like, I literally have to go push like bent knee, dumbbell RDLs now to like very close proximity and failure. Fortunately, what I'm going to do with those is I'm just going to keep them in. Well, I'll basically run out of time here. There's only 2 more dumbbell weights that I can progress through, and then I topped it out. So then I'll change it back to like a barbell or something.
How heavy do they go?
Well, I did the 55. I think they go to 60 kilos, which is like
132.
132. Okay.
Was this decision to drop to 2 working sets and work harder collaborative with Alex or?
So a little bit. So I wrapped up with Alex the week before last, I think. And he gave me a little bit of like kind of future casting of like, hey, this is what I would recommend, moving things into a little bit. And I'm reducing my like targets, because kind of what we were doing before were like sets of 12 and sets of 10. So now I'm kind of going to use like fewer sets, increased proximity to failure, and like that like 7 to 9, 10 rep range, and really, really pushing that. One thing I'm really, really pumped about is I finally hit 10 reps on 170 kilos on the hack squat. And when we had the first block I did with Alex was our neuro phase, that was my top set for 5 reps when we first were there. So I've doubled reps at that weight. And then I shouldn't say my top set, I can't remember, but all I know is like after that entire 6-week neuro block, I got 180 kilos on the hack squat for 5 reps was the most. And that was like a grindy 5. And I did 170 for 10 today.
That's
and
awesome.
That was with like a 1 RIR. So I'm hoping by the time I have like basically 3 more weeks here, I want to have 180 at like 8 to 9 reps,
sick.
Which is like very sick progress.
Yeah, dude, that's very cool. I love that. And I also just wanted to point out how you had those 3 days of 0 tracked. Is that the first time you've done that in how long do you think?
Probably the first time this year.
Okay. Yeah. For some reason, I figured you were like log it every day, make sure it's tracked. Like I have like a 10-year streak thing going or something along those lines.
No, like when I have a coach, right, when I'm paying someone for coaching, it will, because I'm like, I don't want to submit shitty check-ins, Mm-hmm. And if I'm like, hey, I didn't, I can just give you subjective feedback stuff, which is obviously has its place in coaching. I'm just much more firm in kind of where I will stand when I have when there's someone else on my team in pursuit of my goals. Let's put it that way. And I knew I'm not going to be training that much. I might get my 1 training day in. I can't really fall too far from that when I follow my feeding framework, basically.
Well, it's just so interesting how you're like, and I knew I'd come back down, weight, because you're going to undereat if you don't track. And I just think that dichotomy is so funny, and how dependent that is on personality type. And because I know me, and the majority of people I know are going to come back heavier when they're not tracking. So it's like you said, a great testament to kind of your habits and just the way that you live, that would be the opposite,
Yeah.
Cool. Anything else before we jump in here?
I don't think so. Let's dive in.
All right, cool. So like I said in the beginning, the first question is such that I'm going to answer it and also give my training update here. So the question is, have you tried lengthened drop sets as their own set, i.e. taking a full rest before doing the set? And when would you use that method instead of a reverse drop set? And so the quick answer to this question, which I'll then expand on, but the quick answer is that I tend to use the lengthened sets, yes, as this guy said, with full rest. But I do this as a progression throughout the course of a mesocycle. So about a week ago, I put a post on my main feed that was like a progression model for hypertrophy, or my preferred progression model for hypertrophy, or something like that. And one of the ways I listed was, as you're going through and attacking these short overload movements, that, week 1 might be 1 to 2 RIR, then you're 1 or 0 RIR, then week 3 or 4, you start kind of moving into what would be partials. So you would go to failure on a movement and then do some lengthened partials. And then a progression from there would be the reverse drop set. So that would be the example of, maybe now we're in week 5 of the mesocycle, and we've already done to failure, we've already done partials, and now we're into reverse drop sets. So that would be taking a set to relatively close to failure, resting 10 or 15 seconds, adding 20% weight, and then doing partials with a heavier weight. So this guy is saying, would you then do those heavier partials but not as like a 10 to 15 second rest and directly into it, but maybe you would take like a full 2 to 3 minute rest and then just load up a bunch of weight and do lengthened partials. And that is exactly what I do. That is now a week 6 progression for me. So something along the lines of reverse drop set being in week 5, and then maybe in week 6, I just do lengthened partials. And the reason that this fits so well into my training update is because I'm actually in week 8, the end of week 8 of my mesocycle right now. And I took a frequency deload in mid-August. So after 5 weeks, I believe it was, I took a 1 week frequency deload where I basically worked out 3 times over the course of the week instead of 5 times. And then came back and kind of just continued progressing forward. So now I'm in what is week 3 of my cycle after the frequency deload. Not an official deload, just a kind of way to flush some fatigue out. And so the last 2 weeks, I've actually been doing these fully lengthened sets as part of my training. And the one I really want to focus on, there's 2 actually that I want to discuss today. One is my hip extension. And so I've kind of referenced this, alluded to this over the course of the last 6 to 12 months, maybe 6 months. But back in February, I started implementing the very beginnings of these lengthened sets. And so what I did is I would take my 100-pound dumbbells for my hip extension, and I would do as many full reps as I could and then just kind of let the range of motion fall off. At that time, I was only getting 1 full rep, and then I would, go up for the second rep and it wouldn't get high enough. It would just be a partial rep and then reps would fall off from there. And I stated at that time in February that, man, I was really hoping to be able to get 5 reps in a matter of time at the end of the mesocycle, maybe, or whatever that is. And just yesterday, for the first time, I managed 5 full reps with the 100-pound dumbbells. And so basically going from 1 full rep to 5 full reps in 6 months, huge progress as far as I'm concerned at this stage. And then I was reflecting on some of the progress I made on my leg extension and actually made a post. So this would now be the most recent post on my main feed as of August 30th. And the post is basically about a hidden benefit, an under-discussed benefit of these lengthened sets. And I think that the coolest thing about this is that it exposes you to these heavier weights. So one great example I used on my post was my leg extensions, and how I showed a video 18 months ago of me basically doing 180 for 10, and the 10th rep was, 1 RIR or close to 0. It was a tough to lock out rep at 180. And then just yesterday, I did 235 pounds for 8 reps. So that's a 55-pound increase over 18 months for 2 less reps. Sounds pretty significant. And on top of that, it's not like it was a new movement in my program. It was something I'd been using for a year. Like, I bought that machine at the beginning of COVID, so I'd had it for a long time. I'd been using it, progressing on it. And it wasn't until the last year when I really started instituting these lengthened sets, whether in the form of reverse drop set or partials or doing its own lengthened set, where I really started becoming comfortable with these heavier loads. So at first it was, man, I was just doing partials with 235. Like, I even remember putting 235 on there and not even being able to get a full rep. And then now I'm doing my full set of 8 reps at 235, and then I'm doing my partials at 280. So it's just wild to see how exposure to these heavier weights can create both, I think, a physiological adaptation, but also a confidence psychologically going into your set that, hey, I've felt this weight before. This isn't something that is so astronomical that I couldn't imagine actually lifting this. It's like I just did it for partials a few months prior, and eventually this kind of progressed into the ability to manifest into full sets. So yes, I do use these lengthened sets, and I think that they have extremely great benefit to training in general. And as far as it relates to my training updates, what else do I have to say here? That's pretty much the majority of it. I'm going to be taking a full proper deload here the week of September 12th, which is the week that I get that PRP injection in my knee. And so I have, at this point, basically a little less than 2 weeks left in my what will be a 10-week mesocycle. And it's been super productive. I have I think this model that I've discovered and laid out on my Instagram feed is something that I'm a huge fan of. It really, really works well for me. And I've had a lot of people hit me up on DM or elsewhere that have kind of relayed similar sentiments. So I feel like I've kind of stumbled onto something unique here. And it's, I remember even a year ago referencing and saying like, man, I'd really hope in the future, someone asked a question about what do we hope to like leave the industry with or something like that. And I was like, it would be so cool to come up with your own progression model or way of creating intensity or something along those lines. You know how Scott Stevenson did muscle rounds and Borg Fagerly did myo reps, and like, man, it would be really cool to leave the industry with something like this. And I think I'm very much in the infantile stages of it. I don't think that this is something that I'm about to write a book on and be like, this is the method, you know, but I do think that it is something unique that's been working for me and something that I'm excited to continue exploring and be able to kind of relay to other people along the way.
Yeah, I want to say that was in early March when we had, because I remember that episode. And I didn't actually tell you this, but I'm due to write a new program for myself, and I'm going to carry over a lot of my movements and really kind of solidify what I was just displaying or talking about here. But the idea that I had was I'm going to take what you said in that post and build out my weeks from that.
Very cool.
Which I was going to tell you once I did it and stuff, but here we are. We'll have a great opportunity for that.
Yeah, bud, I'm super amped. That's really cool. Well, we'll have to, continue to discuss it and analyze it in further detail as the show goes on.
Absolutely.
Yep. All right, cool. I'm going to bounce this next question over to you. 5 weeks post-cut, 12 pounds up, but can't lose weight on the lowest cals of the cut. And I think that's a question in its own, but then they said metabolic adaptation tips. So I think you can answer that however you feel best.
Okay, here we go. So when I get questions like this, right, and this is something I use with my clients, I want a prove it model. There is a reason why I can't say all anymore, because I have a client who started like last week who's not using chronometer, but an overwhelming majority of my clients use chronometer, and I have them log their foods in a certain way and eat an overwhelming majority of their diet consisting of a certain feeding framework and meal composition structure. One, because I know it works, right? Here, I have some of my own. Now, this isn't me trying to be a dick or call you out or anything like that. I'm just questioning some of these things, right? 5 weeks post-cut, you're 12 pounds up. That's over 2 pounds per week increase, unless you drastically increased calories to, way above maintenance, which would be necessary here. I'm questioning whether you're tracking things accurately, because this is the most common situation that occurs. Now, that being said, there is more information coming out with people with like weight loss resistance and things like that. If you want to find someone who puts out pretty decent information on this, one of my previous coaches, Jason Theobald, on Instagram, he is ScoobyPrep_IFBB Pro. There's really common cases that I know of, people that I know who I've referred to him, who have very poor hormonal profiles, who have slingshot on a lot of weight while doing everything correctly. I'm using air quotes here. Those are less common cases, but they do definitely exist. What I would say, get tested, right? Go to Life Extension or your doctor if they will order it for you. Run thyroid panel, run sex hormones, get your lipids and other things. Maybe a 4-point cortisol test if your energy levels are really, poor or something like that. If you think something is really up and you are doing your due diligence and you're tracking in these sorts of things, where there's smoke, there's usually fire sort of thing, get the tests and you will know. That being said, at a surface level, I would say cross your T's, dot your I's, double check all of your tracking methods, switch to chronometer basically, and start logging 85-90% whole quality nutrient dense food sources before going down these more expensive rabbit holes per se. Yeah,
that's pretty well said. I don't have much to add, but 12 pounds up in 5 weeks is a lot. I mean, I have been I've been going to bed stuffed many a night and eating about as much food as a human can fit in their body. And I am now 9 weeks post-cut and up like 7 or 8 pounds. So it is not easy to gain 2 pounds a week. Like you have to really, really be putting a lot of food down. So my first thought was that there just is probably something slightly off in the tracking mechanism here.
Yep, which is very, very common. Very, very common. And it takes confidence, right? Or conviction or enough reps of seeing it to really start, I don't want to say calling people out, but saying like, I get it as a coach, right? I have a client who's like over 220, who's telling me his logs are coming in at 1,700 calories per day. And I'm like, I have to call him out. I'm like, dude, these logs are nowhere near accurate. They're nowhere near accurate. Because I know if you were eating 1,700 pounds per day, weight would be falling off. And it's not. So I know you're eating significantly more. So just like I said, cross your T's, dot your I's, simplify your food sources, which help with crossing your T's and dotting your I's before digging deep.
Yep. Do you want to start with this next one? Kick it over to you.
Yeah, let's start this one. If you could do the training career all over again with the current knowledge, how would you do it? This one is really, really hard for me because like kind of where we are now, right? We are hobbyist bodybuilders per se. I think I got about as lucky as I could have with my initial, integration into lifting weights and single ply powerlifting for American football sort of thing. My initial thing that comes to mind is I wish I would have like detoured my 5 years spent CrossFit training. That being said, those 5 years, literally gave me everything in my life. So in earnest, it was a very, very worthwhile detour. Obviously, Bryan, it gave me this relationship with you. It gave us Eat, Train, Prosper. It gave me my girlfriend, Jenny. It gave me Jen Ryan, who introduced me to the world of nutrition coaching. Like that time spent there gave me everything. So from a training career, it may have not been, the best spend for hypertrophy and physique. However, there's other, what's the word I'm looking for? Sentimental value that, orders of magnitude outweighs that. I would say I wish over the past 3-ish years, I wouldn't have moved so far away of not trying to get stronger, because I think I have spun my wheels a little bit in losing the benefit of getting stronger over time does have on hypertrophy.
Interesting. Yeah, so you basically took that in the same direction that I was going to, which was that it's really hard to do these sliding doors experiments in your mind, because one change in any variable could mean that we're not where we are today. And that's the thing that I wouldn't want to sacrifice. I would want to go through all of those trials and tribulations and mistakes that I made along the way, because it got me here. So in some ways that's wow, cool, I've achieved where I want to be because I wouldn't change where I am. Alternatively, you could look at it and be like, man, if I would have done these things different, maybe I would be training Chris Bumstead and who knows? There's these other worlds out there, but highly unlikely. So I would say, kind of echoing what you said, CrossFit gave me a step into the fitness industry during a period of time where it was really, really hard to get into the fitness industry. So I vividly remember 2006, 2007 coming out of college and really wanting to work in training because that's what my major was and that's where my passion lied. And looking at the jobs that were available at the time, assistant strength coach of the D2 university or something like that, making $32,000 a year, and the upward mobility potentially 10 years from now putting you at 100K if you're the head strength coach of a D1 school or something along those lines, And I remember getting really depressed about that and thinking how can I do what I want to do, but also make enough money to have fun with my friends, go on trips, eventually support a family, things like that. And CrossFit came along at this time that provided an opportunity to actually make money in an industry that was notoriously difficult to make money in. So I would say if anything were to change, what I would probably change would be like the last 2 years of CrossFit. I probably would have started my meander out of CrossFit a little bit earlier, because this meniscus tear that I have in my knee that I'm getting this PRP injection for, that happened in the last 2 years of CrossFit. I was doing a snatch when I was completely overtrained and really did something gnarly to my hip flexor. Like I heard my hip flexor take like a nice little pop, and that messed me up for a couple weeks. So like little things like that all happened at the end of my CrossFit experience. And while those injuries are still there, like they're still prevalent, they don't really bother me much anymore. I would obviously love to not have those injuries as I go later into life. But professionally, it was what it needed to be. Like I had to go through that to establish myself in the industry. And you know, the evidence-based sphere of training, it was in its infantile stages in like the early 2000 teens, if that's what you call it. Two teens? What do you even call that? So Aaron's shaking his head like, I don't know, the 2000 teens. So I don't even know that if I had left CrossFit much earlier, that I would have fallen into the same sphere that I am now. Like it could have been something else at that time. I might have been back stuck in T Nation, or like who knows where I would have ended up if I didn't come out of CrossFit when I did come out of CrossFit. So all things said, I think that we're exactly where we should be.
Yeah, I love how you phrase that one. I feel like we could take that into like a larger episode, especially the term with the career there. I feel like we could provide a pretty solid insight on that. And for people who are maybe coming out of college, considering, do they go to college? You know, I feel like we could do a pretty good justification episode on that. So I'll mark it and maybe we'll revisit it later.
Cool.
Cool. This one I will kick over to you. You always
let's skip number 4. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Okay. Yeah. You always seem to do leg extensions before compound leg movements. Isn't this significantly limiting mechanical tension on your big compounds?
Yeah, and then he put in quotations, P.S. I get that you're going short to lengthened, because that's like ultimately the main reason I'm doing it is for that reason, going short to lengthened, or maybe not the main reason, but definitely a part of the reason. To answer the part about mechanical tension, I'm a bit skeptical of this. I kind of stand on the side of the muscle is a dumb piece of meat and it only knows tension. Mechanical tension is the word in there that I think refers to how much weight you're actually lifting versus tension just being what the muscle feels. So yes, if I were to do my pendulum squats first before my leg extensions, I potentially would be able to use more weight on my pendulum than I do when I've done leg extensions first. But for what my quads know, my quads are extremely fatigued from the leg extension, and then they go into the pendulum squat and they hit the same level of fatigue with less weight than they would have had I not done the leg extensions first. And so in my mind, what I'm accomplishing here is a equal amount of tension on the quads with less systemic fatigue, because I'm not having to use as much weight on the big compound movement. So that is the justification that I use for that. I am currently in the process of considering a slight change to the way that I do this or implement it. And so currently what I'm doing is I'm doing all of my leg extension work, including partials and reverse drop sets and whatever is included in my leg extensions. And then I'm going to my pendulum after that. What I'm considering is doing one set of leg extensions before pendulum, and it's only a full range of motion set. So there's no partials, there's no excess lengthened work or anything like that. It's just to the desired RIR for my first set full range of motion reps. Then I go and do my pendulum. And then after I do my pendulum, I come back to the leg extension and I do my lengthened partials or my reverse drop sets or whatever kind of the week of the progression calls for. And so I'm not going to change it up this meso because I need that consistent data that I've been tracking over the last 8 weeks. But I think that that's going to be the one big change that I institute as far as a personal experiment when I go into my next meso. And so that will apply also to leg curls. So it'll be like one set of leg curls to concentric full range of motion reps, and then RDL, and then go back to my leg curls for my more lengthened work. So that's going to be the change for this next meso. But to answer the question on tension or mechanical tension, I really think that it comes down to the fatigue that muscle experiences locally, and not necessarily specific to I'm using 20 or 30 pounds less than I would be had I not done the other movement first.
Yeah, I think I will only add a very small bit to this. I think you can get the same amount of tension, with at the end of the day. The two caveats that I think that you briefly mentioned that I think we should just drive home a little bit more are the central fatigue that comes with you using heavier loads to accumulate that tension. For example, what I talked about earlier in the day, right? With my training right now, I'm doing my lengthened compounds first. They bury me. I'm nauseous doing them. I think if I did them second, post, I would obviously have a significantly reduced load. I potentially could avoid some of that, feeling of just being demolished after. And where does this fit into your life? Like me, I come home from, I'll tell you exactly what I do. You guys are probably going to fucking laugh at me. I come home from training, right? I eat my biggest meal of the day. I sit on the couch for 20 minutes and watch an episode of Naruto, which is what I do every day after the gym. Where if you need to shower quick and go back to work or something like that, you may not that nausea and feeling completely demolished may be terrible for your productivity and that sort of thing. So I feel like there's other aspects that come into play here that can help influence which direction you take that.
Yep. And then I'll also say, for what it's worth, that I get a better mind muscle connection with both my quads and my hamstrings when I do the isolation movement first too. All right, cool. We have a quick question here asking if I ever program movements that are not a 10 out of 10 for hypertrophy, like lateral lunges or loaded carries and stuff like that. And no, in my general programs I do, because at Paragon, we opened this episode talking about the enjoyment factor and how important that is for a subscription general group program. So yes, we do lateral lunges as a glute exercise occasionally. We do occasionally do loaded carries as part of a conditioning or core sequence. Maybe it's loaded carries supersetted with decline weighted sit-ups, and then do that for a couple rounds or something along those lines. So I do program them for mass programs. For individuals that are looking to optimize hypertrophy, I just don't think they have a place. The fatigue cost is super high, and that would be my main problem with them, is that you're just not getting enough acute stimulus for how much fatigue is caused by that movement. Anything to add? No. All right, cool. I'll toss this one over to you. Is there a correlation between a larger surplus and larger muscle gain, similar to larger deficit, larger fat loss?
There is, but there isn't. Up to a certain threshold, you are maximizing your hypertrophic signal. But the interesting thing in how this question is worded is you say similar to larger deficit, larger fat loss. But the hypertrophy and larger muscle is a byproduct of calorie surplus. It is not the primary objective of the calorie surplus. The primary objective is to store, energy in increasing body mass as, body fat. Same way that the primary objective of the calorie deficit is fat loss. So hypertrophy and muscle gain is a byproduct of the surplus. It is not the objective of the surplus. So to kind of bring this back, this is a fallacy in thought. We have a maximal rate of hypertrophy that can be obtained whether you have whether let's say a 5% surplus maximizes that hypertrophy signal. A 15% surplus only means that you're just going to get fatter faster. Yeah. But people confuse that very, very often and very poorly. But then what happens on the back end of that is now you just have more dieting to do with no additional hypertrophy from pushing things too fast.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. I think that it is pretty much a fallacy. And I would even say that like that correlation that she's referencing here doesn't actually exist. Like you said, I mean, you can maximize hypertrophy with 100 or 200 calorie surplus. The problem is that that's so ambiguous whether you're actually in a surplus that most people go 400 or 500 calories just to ensure that they're not in a deficit by accident.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Next question, template for weight loss surplus phases, i.e., weight loss for 3 months, surplus for 6 months, or something along those lines.
Yes, I have this exact thing. It is called the Straker Nutrition Company muscle gain and fat loss models. I'm also, being completely transparent, I did not insert this question in here so that I could pitch my product. Someone asked this. And
it was one of my questions.
Yeah. I have something literally built for this. I'm not gonna lie, I built it for myself to illustrate things with clients. And then as I built it, I was like, people need this, right? People ask me for it is exactly how it started. So we should actually get that into the show notes stuff. Yeah. But you can find it if you go on my website, strakernutritionco.com. It's in my link in bio. You can find it on my Instagram. The product comes with both surplus and weight or fat loss. It's built out of the box for 12 months. Non-progress weeks are built into it. It'll give you a high rate of loss, low rate of loss, high rate of gain, low rate of gain. It is basically what I call I use bowling as the analogy. It's like the bumper lanes for bowling for your muscle gain and fat loss.
Cool. We have a bunch of good questions coming up. We actually still have 10 or 11 questions left and only 15 minutes. So I think maybe we just kind of work through them and then we can start off the next episode by finishing up on the questions maybe.
Yeah, I think we can do that.
All right, cool. This one, quick one, I think will be, got a back tweak then been at a conference, then got COVID. Basically, this person's been off the gym for 3 weeks. How do I start back in again is mostly the question here. And I think the answer is slowly. You start with a deload week. You start, 6 reps from failure on everything. You keep volume super low. You realize that 3 weeks off is a huge resensitization phase. So whatever was giving you the good feels and the amount of stimulus that you need before all this happened, you now probably need a third of that. So you can just start back with one set of everything to 5 or 6 reps from failure. Depending on how that goes and how your body responds, then I would just increase that the next week to maybe 2 sets at 3 or 4 reps from failure, see how your body responds to that. And within a matter of 2 or 3 weeks, I would expect you to kind of be back off and running and good to go from there.
Yeah, the only things I would add are make sure electrolyte balance and fluids and stuff are all in place first and all that stuff, especially after the note about C19, it affects different people differently. I got an incredible ab cramp my first 2 sessions back in the gym where I thought I tore my abdominal wall. I have another friend who's been super fatigued, having a hard time returning to the gym because he's just dragging ass in the gym. So just go into it with a grain of salt with that and don't jump out of the gate too hard because you don't want to just set yourself back even further.
Yep. Next one, another quick one. What's a good HRV score? What's a worrisome one? Mine is in the mid 40s. I am definitely not qualified to answer this question. I will just say that when you see my crazy outlier scores of 245 or 220 or whatever it is in the morning, that is a purposeful meditative state that I put myself in to facilitate the most optimal score. When you look at my random scores throughout the day, literally as I'm working, as I'm walking around, as I'm picking the kids up from school and stuff like that. Man, I had 3 yesterday that went 25, 25, 26. And so those are pretty low for me. I'm not often in the low to mid 20s during these random ones, but that happens. I think my random scores are probably right around the 40 to 80 range anyways. So I think HRV is certainly ambiguous. It's also something that, from what I understand, you want to just try and improve against yourself. You don't want to try and compare against someone else. So if you're in the mid 40s now, great. Let's try to get to the mid 50s in the next month or two, through whatever you need to do with breathing and lifestyle changes and stress management and things like that. So there's not like an HRV score that's going to put you in the grave early or anything like that. It's just something that you can use as information to continually improve upon.
Yeah, I would like, for mine, I'm a regular like 50s to low 80s type of person. I've read things before. It's best not to compare your numbers to someone else's, but the variation between some of your baselines and then an improvement over time is the goal there. But admittedly, it's not something that I just pay that much attention to. I think if you are interested in endurance sport, it can have a little bit more of a direct correlation. But again, not a strength of mine.
Yep. Cool. Question 12. How do you approach nutrition when the science constantly changes?
This one's interesting. So something for me, and I guess this is a great time to talk about it. This may end up taking up a little bit of time. We're in a position now where like, let's say like a state in the industry where evidence-based is pretty big, pretty prominent. And you have a lot of coaches now, like sharing evidence-based, research, putting posts out about it, putting stories out about it. I think it is often people jump the gun on things a little early. And personally, what I do with my own clientele and my business, unless I'm only really paying attention at this point to meta-analysis, comprehensive reviews, and basically compilations of studies that all have found consistent evidence for things. If it's a in vitro study, I'm not paying attention to it. If it's a rodent study, I'm not paying attention to it unless it is done in humans in a subset of the population that I work with. Am I really paying attention to it? Like we have the classic example is like a supplement, right? That raised testosterone by like 17%. And people are like, oh my God, 17%. But then it's in like post-menopausal women who are unresistance trained. And I'm like, for fuck's sake. But unless you like read through the selection criteria and stuff like that for the participants, you wouldn't know that. So like take a lot of it with a grain of salt. Another thing is I have always kind of looked to, with my, positioning, I guess, in the space, people come to me who like want to improve their nutrition and get in really good shape. I will lean on people who are the best at getting in good shape is a bit of like the bodybuilding crowd, right? Some of it's complete BS and, bro science sort of thing, but a lot of it also, they were just really ahead of the research. So I can't really think of many times where there's been things where I've been like, holy shit, I am completely wrong about this, because I'm generally kind of skeptical, or I have like a skeptical approach for that reason. But I mean, like one thing, like if we're straight up wrong, like it's okay to be wrong, because at least now you have the right answer and you can do a better job than you were doing before. I don't think there should ever be like, ego attached to that. Like when I'm wrong, I'll say like, yeah, I'm wrong. I also will say like, yeah, I don't know, or that's not in my wheelhouse and I'm not going to speculate on it because I'm probably going to be wrong in that. So I would say like, one, it depends where. I try never and recommend to never find yourself in like a diet camp anyway. And I feel like that's where a lot of the things where like the science changes, where people find themselves in like I only do, like vegan type stuff, or I only do like keto type stuff. There's going to be best or optimal situations for a lot of these as tools. And I've always, put myself in more of the pragmatic position. And when I do get, people who reach out and they're like, Aaron, I want to work with you, but just so you know, I'm like keto. I'm like, yeah, I'm grateful that you want to work with me, but I'm not going to take you on because I'm just not going to do it because it's not a game that I can win. So that's, how I approach it. And it really, I would say in the 4 years that I've been doing this full time, I really can't think of a time that comes to mind where it's like completely flipped when I've been like, holy fuck, this changes everything sort of thing. Anything from you on that one, Bryan?
No, that's really well said. I'll just add that there are certain things that we know, like protein needs to be about 80% of body weight on the lower end, or 75% or whatever that is. So take the things that we know that don't change, and just make sure you're doing those, and that at least handles most of the big rocks. Like I think we know enough at this point to be like, hey, you need a caloric surplus and protein to gain muscle, and you need a caloric deficit and protein to lose fat and not muscle. So yeah, just focus on the things that we do know, and then experiment with the other things that make sense along the way.
Yep, very well said.
Cool. This one here. How important is food quality for health? Let's say you don't eat only bad meals, but okay meals, like wraps with ham or a bit of junk food here and there, and only one super good meal per day. Talk about like the most ambiguous gray, like a super good meal is this, but an okay meal is this.
There's a reason, like when I typed this out, I highlighted some of the words and stuff. So the first question is, how important is food quality for health? It is absorbently important, right? We all, like, I can think of one of my best friends in the world, right? Doesn't lift for all intents and purposes. For someone who is not in the gym, he's shredded. His health is not good. So it's incredibly important. And if you really want to know, go get labs, right? Go get your sex hormones tested. Go get your lipids done, right? Get a CMP, get tested, right? It's very, very accessible. What I thought was really interesting in this question is it's how it's phrased with subjective labels. Let's say you don't only eat bad, right? It's a completely subjective label, bad, but okay meals like wraps with ham. Ham is, it's neither good nor bad. It's all really comes down to opportunity cost of things, right? Or a bit of junk food. So to me, it sounds like this person is trying to justify their lifestyle choices in framing a question that makes it, hey, is what I'm doing okay? Maybe it is, right? How do you define okay? If you feel good, if you are happy with your body composition, if your health markers are in a good enough spot and you're not on, any doctor prescribed medications or in, a risk factor for becoming dependent on some of them, then if you are happy with everything, I think you are perfectly fine. Could you benefit from moving to maybe 2 super good meals per day? Probably, but there's also the potential that it becomes opportunity cost on really high palatability, is that right? Yeah. Tasty foods that you are missing out on, using air quotes here. So to answer the first part of the question, how important is food quality for health? It is incredibly important. Is it going to change you for better or for worse? Maybe it does. Maybe it doesn't. The only way to find out is to experiment and get some labs.
Yeah. I like the way you said that. I feel like for aesthetics, for your physique, food quality doesn't matter. The macros probably matter mostly, and then there could be some small enhancements down the line of better meal quality. But for the most part, I think, as long as you're getting the macros you need, your physique is going to look fine. That doesn't mean that your internal health is fine. So, I mean, yeah, like Aaron said, I don't really have much to add to that. I think you framed it up quite well.
The last thing I will add on the back of what you said, Bryan, is on paper, the macros matter, right? The food quality technically doesn't matter for physique. Where it matters is in how hard it is to adhere to these things because of things like hunger, satiety, bowel movements, right? Gut rot, different things like that. That's where the food quality becomes like an indirect impacting factor of your macros. Like you could eat 220 grams of protein per day of just like drinking shakes, right? But you're probably going to end up with some like downstream cascades of that decision over time. Same thing, like you you may not need fiber. You know, you can have like 7 grams of fiber to hit your carbs for the day, but your poop will likely start to, you know, get rock hard and hard to pass and things like that. So it's indirect versus direct. Think about it as that.
It can also be liquidy. Like, I mean, it could, constipation works both ways too. It could be hard and firm and hard to pass, or it could be basically the complete opposite. And that's also representation of constipation. So,
yep.
Cool. Well, we have like 7 questions left. I feel like we should put these off for next week at the beginning of the episode.
Yeah, we'll do that. And I think it's a perfect way so that we can make sure we get through them all well.
Cool. Sounds good.
Cool. So I guess we are going to end part 1 of the Instagram Q&A here. And then when we come back next week, we will have kind of part 2, like 1.5 really. And then we'll lead into the next episode. So as always, guys, thank you for listening. Bryan and I will talk to you next week.